Yaroslav Romanchuk, president of the International Institute for Freedom, economist, and a popularizer of the Austrian School of Economics in the post-Soviet space, is joining our broadcast. We're glad to welcome you, Yaroslav. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Good afternoon.
Yaroslav, tell us, if we tried to assess where the Russian Federation is hurting the most right now, where are the most critical consequences of the war against Ukraine being felt? In which areas, in which sectors?
Live broadcasts, exclusive projects, reports from different corners of the world. All of this is already available in the Freedom app. No complicated setup, no restrictions. Install the Freedom app from the App Store or Play Market and get instant access to content. Freedom. Watch more, know more, all in one click.
Well, look, what our armed forces, our intelligence, our wonderful generals have done, right? And just imagine if our partners had listened to us back in 2022 and given us the same help, the same support, and trusted us, actually, in the way we conduct the war, right? So for 3 years, it was sanctions, talks, waiting for dialogue. But as soon as our armed forces started destroying the energy and logistics infrastructure, that was it. The war came into their homes. Unfortunately, not every Russian yet. But when it reached Moscow, St. Petersburg, and the main infrastructure facilities in the European part of Russia, everything changed immediately. That's why, of course, eliminating and destroying the energy infrastructure, oil refining, supplying the armed forces, delivering components, and creating maximum obstacles to financing, these are the soft spots, the underbelly that simply needs to be struck in order to force Russia to stop the war and for us to achieve our military goal of liberating our territory. That's why, of course, these $70 billion from our partners for armaments are finally coming through. And really the only thing is, obviously now is not the time to say, see, we told you so. Right now, it's not just about Ukraine anymore. It's about a united front, a European-Ukrainian, EU-Ukrainian, or even NATO-Ukrainian fist, if you will, standing against that Nazi aggressor who has been destroying the world order and international law for so many years. And of course, we need to keep going in the same way, using ballistics, drones, and every possible means, because we have rethought the war. We have turned it in our favor. And naturally, the potential that the Russian economy has, about $2.5 trillion, will be destroyed much faster than if there were only sanctions.
Yaroslav, how would you assess the state of the Russian economy in Russia? Is this really a crisis, or is it stagnation that could turn into a full-blown crisis eventually? Although, as I understand it, certain sectors are already feeling this crisis quite fully, so to speak.
Well, to say that this is a crisis, right? There's not yet a reason to say GDP is down by 5 or 10%, but you see, it's a cumulative effect. First comes stagnation, then recession. First it's one sector, then another. And it's like, when a marathon runner starts out, he runs the first 5 or 10 kilometers pretty easily, but then each kilometer gets harder and harder for him. So today, Russia is at a point where it really can't keep running anymore. It can't move forward. Its energy sector is failing, its financial sector is failing, but there are still some anabolics it can use, like tapping into its population reserves, nationalizing big businesses, or, turning another million people into orcs. In other words, they're already eating into the resources that Russia still has. We're not even talking about development anymore. And the only question is, at what point all these negative trends will converge to trigger a collapse? It's obvious that we haven't reached a collapse yet, but it's just as clear that we're heading in that direction.
Yaroslav, what exactly needs to come together for this collapse to happen? Or is this more in the realm of hypotheticals?
It's not just that. First of all, a significant increase in the number of our strikes on decision-making centers and infrastructure hubs. I really want what our representatives from the military-industrial sector promised us. To blow up Lubyanka, to destroy the mausoleum, that would be such a blow to Russia's pride and willpower, one they wouldn't recover from. Sometimes a refinery gets destroyed, right? There would be less negativity, fewer consequences than if, say a flag fell, right? Or if a decision-making center, for example, was left in smoke. That's what needs to be done. So first of all, of course, there needs to be a significant increase in the number of strikes in the destruction of infrastructure, including Russia's energy infrastructure. Second, it's about taking real effective measures to prevent Russia from using the Baltic Sea to transport oil and petroleum products, in general, to make sure there's nothing there, just like there isn't in the Black Sea. Third, secondary sanctions from the European Union and the United States on financial operations and on those companies that supply components for the Russian military-industrial complex. Well, and of course, a clear declaration from NATO and the European Union that we are entering the war on Ukraine's side and will fight until victory, until Russia surrenders. That's the only way, because trying to be polite or to curry favor with Russia or waiting for Putin to come to the negotiating table, no, that's not going to happen. This person has lost touch with reality, and he only understands strength. The strength that Ukrainians are showing in 2026 needs to be reinforced and supported. And then, in 2026 or 2027, victory will be ours.
And tell me, in your opinion, Yaroslav, how are Russians already, actually feeling the consequences of this war that the Russian Federation is waging against Ukraine? Because earlier, as we mentioned, and as was stated in the introduction, there was an article in Politico saying that before they somehow managed to dodge it, right? But now it turns out that, well, we can see it firsthand. These lines already, as we understand, the gasoline crisis, the motor fuel crisis, Russians are feeling it themselves. What else could there be? What's happening with prices, with exchange rates, and possibly with deposits? Here, as I understand it, there's a pretty clear hint that, guys, at any moment, all your savings could just disappear.
All savings, as Zyuganov and many other representatives of this totalitarian Nazi regime have said, will be confiscated for the benefit of the state. What did you expect? Totalitarian rulers? Do you think they don't act in a totalitarian way? If you thought you had any private property, you were mistaken. The Russian state has already seized pension savings, and the same way it will seize your savings too, because it will be declared as, defending the homeland. Russia's an authoritarian, vulgar, barbaric country, so you shouldn't expect anything different. In reality, when you ask how people will feel it, inflation's already happening. It's 2 or 3 times higher for the average person. What about the fact that there's no gasoline? Well, then get scooters. There's no need for you to go anywhere, right? A sign of how much trouble they're in is the number of gasoline speculators crowding around Belarusian oil refineries and gas stations, right? There was a time when people used to haul away all sorts of other goods like this, and now it's gasoline. It's going to get cold. That cold famine we went through, you'll go through it too. And so, little by little, you'll come to realize if you can't understand with your mind and your heart when your leaders are already encroaching on and destroying Orthodox holy sites in Kiev, if you can't grasp the fact that your 2 million boys have been buried, turned into fertilizer and cripples, well, then you'll get it through your wallet, through your fridge, through the fact that you'll be turned back into paupers. That's the only way. And then they'll raise that Putin and his Ozero cooperative up on pitchforks, and that's when another window of opportunity will appear, one that this time both Ukraine and the world simply must take advantage of to put an end to this evil empire once and for all so that it no longer exists on the world map.
Yaroslav, well, is it possible that if we just endure, somehow everything will work itself out? Here, Valentina Matvienko, the Speaker of the Federation Council, as we've already mentioned, said, just hang in there a little longer and everything will be fine. Yeah, maybe it's just a matter of time, and the wise rulers of the Russian Federation will make everything the way it was. Or is it impossible to turn everything back?
Valentina Matvienko and the rest of those billionaires, those accomplices in Nazi crimes, will be on trial, right? And they definitely are no longer people who inspire trust in ordinary folks. I get the feeling that they're in the same state today as Ceausescu was before those well-known events, right? When he held a referendum, 90% of people were applauding and supporting him. And then suddenly it turned out that both Ceausescu and his wife became the targets of hatred. Today, among Russians who are starting to wake up to what their leaders and their country have been doing since 2014, since 2022, Naturally, what do? They're not going to blame themselves, to cover their heads in ashes, to regret the crimes they've committed. Well, unfortunately, that's not really part of Russian culture yet. That's why they'll look for a scapegoat, someone to blame. Of course, I don't rule out that there will be some kind of public square where Matvienko will be and members of the Ozero Cooperative, but as for Putin himself, they definitely won't bring him to trial.
Yaroslav, at the very least, everyone who took part in that meeting of the Russian Security Council, where the supposed decision about the war against Ukraine was made, should end up in that spot, one way or another. Every single one of them. Absolutely. Yaroslav, thank you for the conversation. Thank you for joining our broadcast. You're always welcome here. Let me remind our viewers that we were joined by Yaroslav Romanchuk, president of the International Institute for Freedom, economist, and a popularizer of the Austrian School of Economics in the post-Soviet space.